So I want you to imagine something for a second. Try to imagine what it actually takes to organize like a global resistance movement, but you have no internet.
Oh, yeah, no smartphones either.
Right. No smartphones, zero social media. How does a message of actual freedom bypass these massive, strict government censorship walls to reach the people who need it the most?
It's a huge question, and what's fascinating here is that in the 1980s, music functioned as this early form of social media. I mean, it was a really powerful tool that carried political and social resistance across borders.
Exactly. And that is the mission of our deep dive today. We're exploring how an artist from the Ivory Coast used the offbeat rhythms of reggae to strike this massive blow against South Africa's systemic racial segregation.
Yeah, and we're getting all of this from a really detailed historical column from Monumental Movement Records, or MMR. It's titled Alpha Blondy and Apartheid, Reggae's Message of Freedom and Resistance.
So for you listening, think of this as like a masterclass. It's not just a music history lesson. It's a look at how universal values like peace and freedom can actually be packaged into art to fight systemic oppression.
It really is. But before we can understand how he fought this massive regime, we kind of need to understand the tools he picked up early in life.
Right, the origin story. So we're talking about Alpha Blondy, who was born Seydou Kone in 1953 in a town called Jigri in the Ivory Coast.
Yeah, and the crucial thing about his upbringing was that he grew up in this incredibly multicultural environment. He didn't just speak one language. He mastered French, Dioula, Igbo, and English.
Which is, I mean, that's four distinct languages.
Four distinct languages, yeah. And then later in his youth, he discovers Jamaican reggae. He officially starts his music career in Abidjan in 1977, and then forms a band called Solar System around 1980.
Solar system, right. And the way I look at this, I look at his linguistic arsenal like a master key ring.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because if you're writing a protest song in just one language, your message is, it's locked into one demographic.
You're only reaching the people in the room with that specific key.
Exactly. But by blending French, English, Dioula, and Igbo, he wasn't just making catchy tunes. He was intentionally designing music that couldn't be locked down. It was built for global export from day one.
Right. And he grounded that global export in Rastafarian ideals, focusing heavily on peace and freedom.
Which gave him a really solid foundation.
Yeah, it was a lifelong mission for him. He used those ideals to weave these really complex religious, political, and social issues straight into his lyrics.
So he builds this incredibly effective multilingual delivery system. But obviously, a delivery system needs a target.
Right, it needs a focus.
And that brings us to the specific dark reality that compelled him to use his voice, which is the South African apartheid regime.
Yeah, and to really gauge the impact of his music, we have to define what that regime was, strictly based on the historical column.
Let's lay out the facts.
So apartheid was a system of institutionalized racial segregation in South Africa. It ran from 1948 all the way to 1994. And it was explicitly designed to maintain white minority rule.
And we're not just talking about separate facilities here.
No, not at all. The restrictions on non-white residents, black, colored, and Indian populations were incredibly severe.
It was a total legal stripping of rights. Really.
Exactly. There were severe limitations on where people could live, their movement, education, healthcare, employment. It was the total stripping of political rights.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why does an artist from the Ivory Coast, thousands of miles away, make South Africa's domestic policy his primary artistic battleground?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, apartheid wasn't just a local domestic issue.
It was global.
Right? It was a profound human rights crisis. It sparked this massive global anti-apartheid movement. For artists everywhere, art and music became these vital international weapons of resistance.
Because you couldn't just ignore it.
You couldn't. So we transitioned from that political context to the actual execution. How did he turn reggae into a direct assault on the apartheid regime?
And we really see that start in 1982 with his debut album, Jah Glory.
Yeah, Jah Glory is a great starting point. The title track itself has this quote, "Jah Glory shall bring us peace and freedom."
Which, at the time, West Africa was going through a lot of its own instability, so it was sort of a hymn for hope locally.
Exactly. But then there's another track, Brigadier Sabari, and the lyric translates to, "Corruption and power abuse we cannot stand."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that one really resonated deeply with the oppressed in South Africa. They felt like he was speaking directly to them.
Even though he was writing from West Africa, that is the power of those universal themes.
But then 1985 happens. And this is a massive escalation.
Yeah, I am still, like, trying to wrap my head around this part. He releases an album in 1985, literally titled Apartheid is Nazism.
Yeah, it's incredibly bold.
Bold is almost an understatement. Naming an album that, in that era, is a highly dangerous move. I mean, the title track literally says, quote, oppression and hatred, just like the dark days of Europe.
He was shockingly equating South African policy to European fascism, right out in the open.
Which is just a crazy, aggressive critique.
And he didn't stop there. He also had tracks like Peace in Zimbabwe, singing, peace must come to every land, Zimbabwe and beyond.
Right, showing solidarity with other movements.
And then there's the religious unity of the track Jerusalem. The quote from that one is, unity and faith will guide our hearts.
So he's hitting them with heavy political realities, but also offering spiritual comfort. But I keep coming back to the packaging here.
The music itself.
Yeah. How did the musical packaging, the smooth, rhythmic reggae make such a heavy, demanding critique palatable to a global audience?
Well, that comes down to the specific musical mechanics. So first you have the heavy reggae bass.
The bass line, yeah.
That heavy bass actually represents the weight of the social message. It's grounded, it's heavy.
But it's not dragging you down because of the rhythm.
Right. You have that offbeat rhythm, the skank, and that physically moves the listeners. It creates almost involuntary reaction to dance.
So you're literally moving your body to this incredibly dense political manifesto without even realizing it at first.
Exactly. You feel the uplift of the music while absorbing the weight of the lyrics.
But, producing the music is only half the battle. We have to talk about how this music actually penetrated the heavily censored borders of South Africa.
Because the state media definitely wasn't playing his records.
Right. So during his 1986 international tour, there was live footage of Alpha Blondy in Johannesburg. But it wasn't on TV. It began circulating completely underground within the non-white communities.
The contrast and the reaction is amazing. The white-dominated South African media deliberately downplayed the shows. They gave him poor reviews, just trying to bury his influence.
But the black community did the exact opposite.
Yeah, they embraced him as this massive symbol of hope.
The column actually has this great direct quote from a local newspaper at the time. It says, a singer from the African continent sang, of our desire for freedom, we are encouraged by his music.
That is just so powerful, to have someone on the outside validating your struggle.
It's like, today, if citizens want to bypass state firewalls to share footage of a protest, what do? They use encrypted apps, or they try to make a video go viral.
Right, digital workarounds.
But back then, the workaround was physical. It was covertly passing bootleg VHS tapes and cassettes, handing them off in the dark.
And the influence of those bootleg tapes was very direct. Local South African reggae artists gained courage from listening to him. Some even started mimicking his style to create their own original protest songs.
He essentially handed them a blueprint for musical resistance.
They really did.
But we also have to highlight that this wasn't just like a publicity stunt from the safety of a recording studio. He actually put boots on the ground.
Yeah, the timeline of his activism proves he was deeply committed.
Let's trace that timeline. In 1987, he physically visited South Africa to support the oppressed.
Which was incredibly risky.
Highly risky. Then, in 1990, he held a major live concert there, and in 1991, he held a joint concert with local artists, which culminated in them releasing a joint statement.
He was sharing his massive platform with the local voices that the government was trying to silence.
And then, in 1994, the monumental shift happens. Apartheid finally ends, and the first black president is elected.
Which, this raises an important question. Because a lot of artists abandon a cause once it's officially won in the headlines.
Right. The laws change, so they go back to writing regular pop songs.
Exactly. But Alpha Blondy didn't do that. His work didn't stop when the regime fell.
Yeah, the column points out that in 1999, he released the album Merci, and his focus shifted toward peace and unity.
He pivoted his physical activism, too. He moved toward educational support, youth mentoring, and human rights awareness in South Africa.
Which really proves that his commitment was always about those universal human rights, not just tearing down a regime, but actually helping to rebuild the community afterward.
It's the difference between performative outrage and actual lasting solidarity.
It really is an incredible journey. I mean, we're talking about a multilingual kid from the Ivory Coast who used the heavy bass of reggae to completely bypass state censorship.
He called out global injustices by name.
By name. And provided an actual physical lifeline of hope to millions of people living under South African apartheid.
Through music. It's just wild to think about.
It is. So what does this all mean for you? Next time you are driving or working out, I challenge you to look at your own Spotify or Apple Music playlists.
Look at the lyrics you're passively absorbing.
Exactly. What messages are embedded in the music you consume every day? Are they just catchy beats to pass the time, or are they carrying the weight of a movement?
Because music has that power. It always has.
It definitely does.
And I want to leave everyone with a final lingering question to ponder.
Lay it on us.
If an artist in the 1980s could unite a global resistance and bypass state censors using only underground cassettes and live reggae shows, what is the equivalent underground frequency for social justice in our hyper-connected algorithm-controlled world today? Are we still capable of that kind of pure musical solidarity?